My name is Marcus Delaney. I'm 42 years old. I'm a former Army officer turned insurance attorney. And for the past 10 years, I've been a single father to my son, Eliza. I work long hours, I keep my head down, and I try to live by 2 rules. Never owe anyone more than you can pay back, and never let people think your silence means they've won. This past Christmas, I was working a double shift in the ER, and while I was out there helping strangers survive the holidays, my own parents and sister told my 16-year-old son there was no room for him at their Christmas table. He was told casually, almost politely, to go home. And he did. He drove back alone, through snow, to an empty house with no dinner, no presents, no family. They didn't call to check if he got home safe. They didn't even send a text. They fed strangers at that table, but not my son. And they thought I wouldn't find out. I didn't make a scene. I took action. The next morning they found a letter. And then they started screaming. It was 1:17 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I'd just pulled into the driveway, and the porch light was still on. That was the first sign something wasn't right. Eliza always turns it off before going to bed. Always. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, still in my scrubs, my bones aching from 14 straight hours on my feet, and walked up the front steps. It was quiet. No wind. No cars. No life. Just that porch. Light buzzing faintly, like it was waiting. I pushed the door open. The smell of cinnamon and leftover instant noodles hit me. It wasn't the smell of Christmas dinner. It was the smell of solitude. The kitchen light was on. I walked in, and there it was. The chair at the end of the table. Empty, straight-backed, pushed in. Too perfect. Beside it, a small square box wrapped in green and gold paper. Unopened. Untouched. On top of the box, a folded sticky note in Eliza's handwriting. It said, "It's okay, Dad. I get it now." I didn't sit down. I didn't even take off my coat. I stood there looking at that chair, and something inside me, something I'd been holding down for years, started to move. You see, Eliza never complains. He's the type of kid who brings a camera to dinner because he wants to capture the lighting on Grandma's chandelier. He listens more than he talks. He's respectful, kind, almost, too forgiving for his own good. But when your 16-year-old son writes, "I get it now," and doesn't explain what it is, you start thinking differently. I walked over to the counter. Microwave light still blinking 12 Noro. There was a bowl in the sink. Half-finished ramen. No garnish. Just boiled and swallowed in silence. The living room still had the tree lights on, but no gifts under it. Only 3 stacked on the corner, wrapped with sharp corners, and Eliza's careful handwriting. Each one labeled to Grandma, to Grandpa, to Aunt Cheryl. I sat down at the kitchen table facing the chair he would have sat in if they'd made room. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel since my wife left. Rage. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that breaks things. This was deeper. The kind of rage that plans. The kind that writes letters. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it knows the truth always echoes louder in silence. And that night, I made a decision. If they couldn't make room for my son at their table, then I'd make sure they'd never forget what it felt like to be left out. Not through vengeance, through consequence. And it would begin with that empty chair. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the kitchen watching the Christmas lights blink against the wall. One of them had gone out near the top of the tree, making the whole strand flicker unevenly. It bothered me more than it should have. That's the thing about the little details. They only start to matter when everything else falls apart. I guess I should have seen this coming. Let me tell you something about me. I wasn't always the kind of man who kept quiet when he was angry. I used to lead men through combat zones. I used to raise my voice when it meant getting someone to safety. I served 10 years in the Army, got honorably discharged after a roadside bomb took out the lead vehicle in our convoy. I came home with a limp in my left leg and a silence in my chest I couldn't quite shake. I thought I'd find peace in the civilian world. Instead, I found courtrooms and closed doors. Now I work as a litigation attorney for an insurance firm. It's not glamorous, but it's predictable. And after what I've lived through, predictable is good. But the best thing I ever did, the thing that kept me sane through all of it, was raising my son, Eliza. He's 16 now. Tall, thin, a little awkward in the way most brilliant kids are. He doesn't say much, but when he does, you want to listen. His voice is soft, like he's always thinking 3 thoughts ahead of what he's saying. He loves photography. Not the phone camera kind, the real kind. Film light meters red rooms. He says silence speaks in shadows, and I believe him. His mother left when he was 10. No warning. Just a note and a plane ticket out west. I remember the day he asked me if she was ever coming back. He didn't cry. He just folded the note she left into a paper crane and set it on the windowsill. It stayed there for 6 months. That's Eliza. He folds his pain into corners and tucks it somewhere no one will trip over it. Which is why when he came home early on Christmas and didn't say a word, I knew something inside him had torn. You see, I've spent years preparing Eliza for the world. Taught him how to change a tire, how to iron a shirt, how to stand up for someone without swinging fists. But I never thought I'd have to teach him how to survive being unwanted by the people who are supposed to love him the most. I thought my family would see him the way I do as a good kid, who's trying his best, quietly, steadily, without complaint. Instead, they saw him as extra, an inconvenience, too old to coddle, too quiet to impress. And now he's sitting in his room pretending everything's fine, because that's how I raised him, to be respectful, to be patient. But I see it in the way his eyes don't linger, in the way his hands tighten when someone mentions Christmas. He's trying not to blame me, and that's the part that breaks me most. Because deep down he's wondering why I sent him there, why I trusted them, why I didn't know better. But I do now, and that means I can't stay silent anymore. Not for him, not for me, not for what's right. Because when you've lived through war, you learn to recognize ambushes. And what happened to my son wasn't just neglect, it was a message. And I've decided it's time to send one back. There's a certain kind of silence that feels loud. You don't notice it right away. Not until you realize your shoulders are tense, your breathing's shallow, and your mind has started filling in all the blanks the silence refuses to explain. That was the kind of silence hanging in my kitchen that night. It wasn't peaceful. It was pointed. Every surface was clean, like Eliza had wiped it down after finishing that pathetic bowl of noodles. No clutter. No crumbs. No signs of a holiday except the tree lights still blinking in the corner like they hadn't gotten the memo. And then there was the chair, still pushed in. Straight. Untouched. That chair hadn't been sat in all night. It's funny how a piece of furniture can hold more truth than a person. That chair told me everything my son didn't. He came home. He didn't eat at the table. He didn't unwrap his gift. And he didn't want me to worry, but he left the light on anyway. Because somewhere in him, he was still hoping I'd notice. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes, tried to piece it all together. Why hadn't he stayed? Why hadn't anyone messaged me? My family knew I was working that night. They insisted it was fine for Eliza to spend Christmas with them. Of course, we'll include him, they'd said. He's family, they'd smiled. But the house didn't lie. The untouched gift, the chair, the bowl in the sink, it all screamed the same thing. Something happened, and they let it happen. I opened the fridge. One slice of leftover pie, a note on it. For Dad. Even then, after being turned away, he'd saved me dessert. I didn't cry. I don't cry. Not since Afghanistan. But I felt something shift in my chest like a lock, turning in a door I hadn't opened in years. There's a moment in every soldier's life when you realize the enemy isn't across the border, it's closer. It's familiar. That night, I realized I'd made a mistake. I'd trusted the wrong people to protect the right one. And the worst part, it wasn't a mistake of the moment. It was a pattern. One I'd ignored for too long in the name of keeping the peace. That was over now. Because sometimes, the quietest rooms hold the loudest truths. And sometimes, a single empty chair is all it takes to know something is broken, beyond repair. I took one last look at the table. 3 gifts still wrapped, all for people who couldn't make space for my son at a table big enough for 12. I turned off the kitchen light. The chair disappeared into the shadows, but I didn't forget where it was, and neither would they. The next morning I woke up before the sun. I hadn't planned to, didn't set an alarm, but my body knew. Something was wrong, and it hadn't let me rest. I got out of bed quietly. The house still smelled like cinnamon and dust, the kind of stillness that doesn't settle. It waits. I sat down at the kitchen table, same spot as the night before, and opened my phone. I scrolled back through my messages with Eliza. There weren't many. He doesn't text unless he has something to say. Never been one for emoji or filler words. But that afternoon, his messages started out normal. 3:12 p.m. Made it to Grandma's. Drive was fine. House looks the same. 3:44 p.m. Uncle Rob brought wine. Sophie's doing TikToks in the hallway. 4:18 p.m. Dinner's getting pushed back. More people just showed up. 5:09 p.m. Everything's fine. Just busy. That last one. Just busy. That wasn't his voice. That was the kind of thing people say when they don't want to lie, but they can't tell the truth. I tapped the security app linked to the front door camera. We keep it for packages and late-night visitors. There he was, Eliza stepping onto the porch at 6:03 p.m. Jacket zipped up to his chin, head down. No one behind him. No one walking him out. He fumbled with the key, missed the lock the first time. His hand was shaking. I watched him push the door open, walk inside, then pause just for a second, like he was hoping I might be home after all. And then the door closed. The clip ended. My hand stayed on the phone, but my mind went somewhere else. Back to his 10th birthday, the year after his mom left. I threw him a small party, just the 2 of us, and a lopsided chocolate cake. I remember he waited 20 extra minutes before blowing out the candles. He told me later he was hoping maybe she'd walk through the door if he waited long enough. I'd seen that look on his face again last night in the camera footage. He wasn't just coming home. He was retreating. And I let it happen. I told myself he'd be fine, that my family would treat him right. But the texts, the camera, the silence, they told me everything I needed to know. He didn't leave because he was bored. He left because they made him feel like he didn't belong. And now I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow it. I set the phone down, looked at that same chair, still empty, still accusing. The feeling in my gut wasn't confusion anymore. It was certainty. The next thing I did was check the camera. We don't live in a bad neighborhood. But I installed a front door cam 3 years ago after a neighbor's car got broken into on Christmas Eve. I never thought I'd be using it to piece together the moments my son came home in silence. I scrolled through the log. There it was. 6:03 p.m. Timestamp locked in clean. The lens caught him turning into the driveway, parking slowly, getting out with the kind of deliberate calm you only see when someone's trying not to fall apart in public. He had his coat zipped all the way up. The one I bought him last month, green military-style weatherproof. Still looked too big on him. His hands were in his pockets. No smile. No bounce in his step. He stood in front of the door for a few seconds. pulled out his keys, fumbled. Not because it was cold, not because he was clumsy, because his hands were shaking. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open just a few inches, then paused. That pause broke me. He looked over his shoulder like he was waiting for someone to call out to say they were kidding, to tell him not to go, that he could stay, that they'd made a mistake. But no one came after him. No one walked him out. No one held a plate for him. No one followed. He walked inside. Alone. The door closed softly behind him. The feed ended. I sat there staring at the black screen, my thumb hovering over the replay button. I didn't need to watch it again. I already knew every frame by heart. What I didn't know was how long he sat in this house still wearing that coat. Whether he stood by the kitchen table looking at the gifts he wrapped the night before, or whether he just went straight to his room and tried to sleep away the part of the night that should have belonged to Joy. What I knew for sure was this. He didn't say anything because he thought he shouldn't. He didn't want to make me feel guilty. He didn't want to ruin my night. And maybe deep down he thought it was his fault. That somehow not being entertaining enough, not being outgoing, not being like Cheryl's kids, made him forgettable, disposable. But it wasn't his fault. It was theirs. And it was mine. Because I let them believe that he wouldn't notice, that he would accept crumbs and smile like they were a feast. I stared at the paused frame, his back turned, his head low, his figure disappearing into the warmth of a house that couldn't offer him what he'd been promised. And I realized the camera had captured what my memory wouldn't let me erase. A boy in a coat too big, carrying a heart too quiet, coming home from a family gathering where he was never really invited. It didn't start this Christmas. That's the part that hurts the most. Realizing this wasn't a one-time oversight, but the latest drop in a quiet flood I'd been too tired or too hopeful to notice. The memories didn't come all at once. They came in flashes, one by one, clean, surgical, unforgiving. Thanksgiving 3 years ago. My father had carved the turkey with his usual precision. Everyone gathered around the long oak table. Cheryl's kids sat up front, perfect posture cloth napkins in their laps. Eliza was at the folding card table near the laundry room. Not because there wasn't space. There were 3 empty chairs at the big table, but because he's used to sitting there. He didn't complain. He just picked at his mashed potatoes and folded the edges of his napkin into sharp triangles. Easter the year before that, the family egg hunt. Everyone got baskets. Cheryl's daughter Sophie got hers wrapped in a pink bow with her name embroidered on the side. Eliza's basket was a plastic Halloween pail from the garage. When I asked about it, Mom laughed. He doesn't care about that stuff anyway. He did. He just didn't say it. His 12th birthday. We celebrated at my parents' house. I brought the cake. He brought his camera, excited to show Grandma his first printed photo series. Landscapes, light studies, really thoughtful work. She flipped through them, nodded once, then turned to Cheryl and asked if Sophie was still doing ballet. Eliza stood there holding his photos, like homework turned in late. That night, he left them on the kitchen counter. I asked if he wanted to put them in his room. He said, "No. I don't think anyone's going to ask to see them again. Christmas last year. I remember now. I was on call then, too." Eliza had gone ahead to the house while I finished up paperwork. When I arrived, I found him in the living room sitting by himself, while Cheryl's kids handed out gifts. No one had saved one for him to give out. His name wasn't on the family tree. I asked him later if he noticed. He said, "Maybe I'm just supposed to be background." And God help me. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't want to cry in front of him. I thought those were small things, little slights, family quirks. But they weren't. They were breadcrumbs leading to this year's truth, a dinner table too full to make room for the quiet kid who never asked for anything except to belong. And now the picture was clear. Not because of one empty chair, but because of every time we pretended he was lucky to be invited at all. I stood up from the table. My knees cracked. My hands shook. This wasn't about manners anymore, or misunderstandings. This was patterned neglect disguised as tradition. And I had let it stand for too long because I thought silence meant keeping the peace. But now, all I could hear was the sound of my son eating alone in a house that was supposed to be a home. If you ever want to understand, a family don't listen to what they say. At reunions, look at who gets forgiven the fastest and who gets forgotten the most. My sister Cheryl was always the former. And well, you already know where I landed. She's 3 years younger than me. Polished. Poised. Never late. Never loud. Even as kids, she spoke like someone was grading her. By the time we were teenagers, she already knew how to mirror what our parents wanted. Straight A's. Church every Sunday. No raised voices, no scraped knees, no talking back. On the other hand, I joined the army at 17. Broke curfew. Asked questions no one wanted to answer. They called her mature. They called me difficult. She married Robert Benson at 24. Finance guy. Drives a white Tesla. Always wearing button-downs without wrinkles and opinions without edges. They have 2 kids, Kyle and Sophie, both gifted and enrolled in everything that looks good on paper. Cheryl has a gift. She knows how to manage perceptions. She sends holiday cards with matching sweaters. She remembers birthdays with Pinterest-level cupcakes. She organizes charity toy drives and thanks people with calligraphy. And she always, always knows how to make you feel like you're the one who fell short without ever saying it out loud. When I came back from deployment, I was different. I didn't like crowds. I didn't smile for no reason. I didn't tell stories about the desert. Cheryl made space for me, but not in a way that welcomed. In a way that said, "We'll be polite about your trauma, but don't spill it on the rug." When I became a single dad, she offered help, but it came with quiet comparisons. Her kids did gymnastics and Spanish immersion. Mine liked old books and silence. She'd say, "Well, not everyone is a talker, or I guess some boys are just different." It was always under the surface, but it was always there. She didn't hate Eliza. She just didn't know what to do with him. He didn't fill a room. He didn't flatter. He didn't compete. And in Cheryl's world, if you didn't stand out the right way, you disappeared. The saddest part, Eliza never hated her for it. He admired her, thought she was elegant. He once told me Aunt Cheryl makes everything look like it belongs in a magazine. And maybe that was the problem. In her eyes, he didn't. But me, I saw everything Cheryl was trying to preserve, a family image, with no cracks, no discomfort, no Eliza. And now, after all these years, I couldn't pretend anymore. I used to think Cheryl was just playing by the rules. Now, I see she helped write them. Christmas at my parents' house was always a production. They decorated like they were expecting royalty. Table runners that matched the napkins. Candle holders with gold trim. A 12-foot artificial tree that looked like it belonged in a department store window. Every year, Margaret, my mother, would say the same thing. Tradition is how we show we care. And every year, that tradition looked a lot like a scoreboard. Kyle, Cheryl's oldest, always got the prime seat at the table right next to Grandpa. He'd be handed the carving knife told to show leadership, even when he was 10. Sophie would pass out gifts in her sparkly holiday dress, getting complimented after every bow. There were always extra gifts under the tree for them, labeled things like, "just a little extra," or "couldn't resist." Their stockings were embroidered. Their names hung on the mantel. Eliza's usually a plain red one pulled from a backup bin. Once his name was misspelled on the tag. They said it was a printing error. No one fixed it. I tried not to let it show how every little moment chipped away at something in me. The way they reacted to Kyle talking about soccer. versus how they nodded politely when Eliza mentioned a photo contest he entered. When Sophie performed a dance, everyone clapped. When Eliza showed a short film he'd made, quiet, beautiful, about a woman waiting at a train station, they said it was a little abstract. There was the year Cheryl's kids got iPads. Eliza got a gift card, $25 to a bookstore. They said, "He's so thoughtful, we figured he'd prefer something simple." He smiled, said, "Thank you," then folded the receipt into a paper crane and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He never used the gift card. I asked him about it months later. He shrugged and said, "Didn't feel like it was for me, really. More like something to say they didn't forget." But they had. They forgot the difference between being present and being meaningful, between giving something and giving a damn. I told myself it wasn't intentional, that maybe it was just habit. Maybe Cheryl's kids were easier to impress. But then I remembered Eliza's first Christmas without his mom. He was 11. He made handmade ornaments for everyone, tiny ones with initials carved in softwood. He wrapped each in tissue paper and wrote a note inside. They were barely acknowledged. The next year, he didn't make anything. I asked why. He said, "I think I was trying too hard." That stuck with me. Because what kind of world are we building when a child tries to love people more and they teach him to love them less? Every Christmas, I watched it happen, in real time. And I let it pass because I thought, at least he's still included. But inclusion without warmth is just exposure. And exposure, when repeated enough, starts to feel like rejection. When I finally called Cheryl the day after Christmas, I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I just asked a question. Why didn't Eliza stay for dinner? There was a pause. Not long, just enough to confirm that she already knew what I was talking about. Then she said it. Flat. Easy. Like it meant nothing. "It's just a chair, Marcus. Just a chair." Like that explained everything. Like the absence of one seat at the table wasn't the final proof that he didn't belong. But that's the thing people like Cheryl never understand. It's never just a chair. A chair is an invitation, a gesture, a promise that you were expected, that someone thought of you when they laid out the forks and folded the napkins. And when that chair isn't there, when they don't even think to make space for you, you don't need to be told you're not welcome. You feel it. You feel it in your bones, in the hesitation at the doorway, in the forced smile as you pretend it's okay to eat standing up, or worse, to go home. Cheryl kept talking, saying things like, "We didn't know the guest list would grow, and Mom assumed you'd be back in time to join him, and there was food in the kitchen he could have made a plate." She never once said, "We should have made sure he had a place." Because in her world, what mattered wasn't who sat down, but how the table looked when they did. And Eliza, with his quiet questions, his too long pauses, his habit of observing instead of performing, he didn't match the decor. So she made a decision, one she'd probably made a dozen times before in smaller, quieter ways. She left him out, not out of hatred, not even out of malice, just out of convenience. And that to me was worse, because it meant she didn't even see the damage, didn't care enough to lie about it. Just a chair. But for Eliza, that empty space was the last line in a long pattern, the final proof that he was always optional. And for me, it was the moment I realized I could no longer be silent. I hadn't written a letter by hand in over 15 years, not since my last deployment. Back then, it was the only way to stay human in a place designed to strip that from you. A pen, a piece of paper, they were weapons too. Just quieter ones. This letter wasn't about survival, but it was about something just as vital. Dignity. Not mine. Eliza's. The morning after Christmas, I cleared the kitchen table, pushed my laptop aside, pulled out an old legal pad from a drawer I rarely opened. The pen felt strange in my hand, too honest, too final. But that's why it had to be done this way. No email, no text, no room for forwarding or forwarding back, no comment threads or apologies with emojis, just ink and truth. I started simple Dear Mom, Dad, and Cheryl. Then I sat in silence for a full minute, just breathing. Then I wrote. I told them what Eliza saw when he walked into that house, how he stood there scanning for a place to sit, only to realize again he hadn't been included, just tolerated. I told them what that felt like, how you can only be overlooked so many times before you stop trying to be seen at all. I didn't use big words, didn't quote psychology or throw in guilt, just memory. Moments they thought were small, like the time Eliza wasn't in the family photo because Cheryl's kids had matching sweaters, and he didn't. Or the birthday when they forgot his age and gave him a card that said 14 when he'd just turned 15. Or when Grandma called him quiet like his dad, but said it like a flaw, not a bond. I wrote about the gift wrapping, how he spent the night before Christmas, folding edges, perfectly measuring ribbon taping corners, like it meant something, only to come home and find his own gift unopened. I wrote all of it. And then I wrote what I wanted them to know most. He came home early, not because he was tired, but because you made it clear there wasn't space for who he truly is. You didn't forget him. You erased him slowly, politely, repeatedly, until the silence felt normal. I'm not asking for a reply. I'm not asking for a fix. I just need you to know this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message, and he received it. When I finished, I didn't reread it. I folded the pages, sealed the envelope, and placed it by the door next to the 3 gifts Eliza had wrapped for them. Still unopened, still beautiful, still waiting for hands that didn't deserve them. Then I drove to their house. No announcement, no confrontation. I slipped the letter into the mailbox, left the gifts on the porch. Then I got back in the car, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not angry, not bitter, just clear. Cheryl's voice came through the phone like a slap, clipped, tight, shaken in a way that almost sounded rehearsed. Marcus, what the hell did you send them? I didn't answer right away, because I knew what she really meant was, how dare you tell the truth out loud? She kept talking, said Mom was crying, said Dad slammed the garage door so hard it cracked the frame. I let her speak, let the words pile up like dishes in a sink no one wants to wash. Then I said, calm and steady, I sent them a letter. Silence. Then she scoffed. You made it sound like a death notice. It was Christmas, Marcus. I could have said so many things. I could have reminded her that Eliza spent his Christmas eating instant noodles while her kids filmed dances in front of the fireplace. I could have asked if she even remembered what his voice sounded like when he tried to be part of their world. But instead, I just said, if the truth reads like grief, maybe it's because something died. Then I hung up. Let her sit with that. Because the truth is, that letter wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. It didn't accuse. It illuminated. It reminded them that memory has sharp edges. And I was done sanding them down just to keep the peace. Let me tell you what was in that letter, the part that made them scream. Do you remember the year Eliza brought his camera to Christmas? The one he saved for, begged for, waited 3 birthdays to afford. He took portraits of all of you, adjusted the lighting, asked you to smile naturally. And when he showed you the photos, you laughed and said you looked tired. You never asked to see them again. Do you remember when Sophie got braces and we all had to chew sugarless gum in solidarity? But when Eliza got glasses, no one noticed the lenses had cracked the second week. Do you remember when Cheryl's kids got their own Christmas tree upstairs, and Eliza asked if he could hang one ornament, just one? You said the color didn't match. I reminded them that small exclusions add up, especially when they're consistent, especially when the person being excluded never complains. I wrote Eliza's not loud. He doesn't storm out. He doesn't throw things. He just absorbs. And eventually, he adjusts himself so small that you stop seeing him altogether. But I see him. Every single day. And now, so will you. At the end of the letter, I included one sentence, the one I knew would hit hardest. You didn't forget him. You just made space for everything else first. No anger. No demands. Just the kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be noticed. It forces you to sit with it. The second call came just before midnight. Same number. Same name glowing on the screen. Cheryl. I let it ring once. Twice. Then picked up without a word. Her voice this time sharper. Edges fraying. They're furious, Marcus. I didn't ask who they were. Didn't need to. She kept going. Dad punched the garage wall. Mom locked herself in the bathroom for an hour. You've humiliated them. I leaned back in the chair. The room was dark, except for the lamp in the corner and the soft hum of the heater. I could hear Eliza upstairs, his footsteps, soft, shuffling between bookshelf and bed. They're saying you turned Eliza against us, Cheryl snapped. That you made up half that letter to make them feel guilty. I waited. Then, in the calmest voice I've ever used with her, I said, they must have gotten to the end. Silence. Dead air. I could almost hear her thinking, trying to recall what part of the letter I was referring to. Was it the line about being erased politely? Was it the part about the photos, the tree, the forgotten name tag? No, it was the final line, the one I'd written last but meant first. You didn't forget him. You just made space for everything else first. That's the line that tore through their bubble. Not because it was loud, but because it didn't leave room to hide. Cheryl tried again. You made it sound like we planned it, like we were cruel on purpose. I closed my eyes for a moment, saw the chair again, the unopened gift, the timestamp, 6:03 p.m. You didn't have to plan it, I said. You just had to keep doing what you've always done. She was quiet then. Longer this time. I could feel the weight of her breath on the other end, the unraveling. She wasn't used to this version of me, the version that didn't dodge discomfort, that didn't explain away the cracks, just to protect the picture frame. Finally, she said, "You're really not coming next year, are you?" And I told her the truth, no. Because tradition without humanity isn't tradition. It's choreography. And I was done dancing around their shame. Before she hung up, she muttered, "I just wish you'd said something sooner." And maybe she meant it. But maybe what she really meant was, "I wish you hadn't said it at all." The text came at 6:14 a.m. from Dad. 8 words, no punctuation. You're blowing this out of proportion, Marcus. Not even a question, just a verdict served cold, like the leftovers Eliza never touched. I didn't reply, not right away. 3 hours later, the phone rang. This time, it was the house line, the one Mom and Dad still kept on the wall, with the same ringtone from the 90s. I answered. Mom went first. Her voice wasn't trembling. It was rehearsed. The kind of calm you practice when you've already decided you're the victim. "Marcus, we read your letter." I stayed quiet. It felt harsh. Still quiet. "You made it sound like we excluded him on purpose." Then Dad chimed in. "Marcus, come on. Eliza never said anything. Not once. You'd think if he was upset, he'd tell someone." I let them talk. They went down the list, how they always saved him a plate, how he got the same number of gifts, how Cheryl's kids are just more social, how I was reading too much into small things. I didn't interrupt. They said I was being dramatic, that I was dragging up old stuff that wasn't meant the way it sounded. At one point, Mom said, "He's a teenager, Marcus. Teenagers isolate. You can't blame us every time he chooses to sit quietly." That's when I finally spoke. He didn't choose silence. He accepted it. A pause. Then I added, Because he learned over years that speaking up didn't change anything. They didn't like that. Dad got defensive. We were never cruel. And I didn't argue. I said, I didn't say you were cruel. I said you were consistent. Another pause. Longer this time. Mom's voice softened Marcus. We never heard him complain. And that was the moment. The exact sentence that broke whatever thread was left. Because the truth is, Eliza didn't complain. Because kids don't complain when they believe being ignored is their fault. They adapt. And every time he smiled and said it's fine, they took it as proof that it was. But I knew better. I knew what it's fine really meant when it came from a boy who slept with headphones, in just to mute a world that made him feel optional. So, no, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, this isn't about whether he complained. It's about whether you noticed he never felt safe enough to. And then I ended the call, not in anger, but in finality. Because when someone confuses silence for satisfaction and neglect for normal, you don't need to shout to make your point. You just need to stop letting them finish your story for you. They thought it was all in my head, that I'd read too much into things, that I was bitter or overprotective. But the thing about memory is when it belongs to someone you love, it's not a story, it's evidence. And I had plenty. Not written down, not documented, just etched into me from years of watching my son shrink himself in real time. I remember the first time it happened. He was 7. We were at Cheryl's house. Big dinner, full house. Sophie had just started ballet, and Kyle was building Lego robots that might win a competition. Eliza brought a drawing, a crayon sketch of a forest full of detail. He handed it to Mom with both hands, so careful. She smiled politely, said, "Thank you," and set it beside the napkins. 10 minutes later, someone spilled gravy. The drawing soaked up every drop. No one noticed, except him. He didn't cry, just stared. Folded his hands in his lap. Didn't speak for the rest of the night. He was 10 when he learned what it meant to be the extra. I'd asked if he could help Cheryl set the table. She handed him the paper plates, told him to just handle the kids' corner. When he asked if he could sit at the main table that year, Grandpa said, "Let's keep things simple." So he sat alone between the fridge and the back door. And when I offered to sit with him, he shook his head and said, "It's okay, Dad. I'm used to it." He was 12 when Cheryl's family planned a group photo and asked Eliza to take it, not be in it. He held the camera steady, waited for everyone to smile, and clicked the shutter like it didn't matter. But when we got home, he asked me, "Do I not look like family?" I said, "Of course he did." And he nodded, but he never offered to take a photo again. They forgot those things, because to them they were harmless, small, forgettable. But to him they were markers, proof that inclusion came with terms, conditions, an expiration date. So when my parents said he never said anything, I answered with what they wouldn't dare deny. You didn't forget on purpose. You forgot because you could. Because nothing about his pain ever inconvenienced you enough to remember. And then I said the sentence that made my father go completely quiet. You taught me that silence was a strength, but I'm teaching my son that silence is sometimes just grief, wearing a polite face. Eliza didn't forget. He remembered it all. The chairs, the sideways glances, the jokes he didn't understand that they never bothered to explain. He remembered every single time he was almost family. And that's the thing, they didn't need to say it out loud. They never had to say, "You don't belong," because he heard it anyway in the clink of cutlery when no one saved him a seat in the way gifts were handed out, before he even arrived in the photos where he held the camera, but never got to smile in front of it. They forgot. But my son didn't. And now, neither would I. The first thing I did was leave the group chat. You know, the one, the Delaneys, where Cheryl shared cookie photos, Dad forwarded chain prayers, and every major holiday came with a digital RSVP. I didn't say anything. Just tapped leave conversation. No dramatic exit, no speech, just absence deliberate and undeniable. 3 minutes later, Cheryl texted me separately. Was that really necessary? I didn't answer. Because yes, it was. Next, I went through the stack of holiday invitations still sitting on the kitchen counter. There was one for New Year's brunch, one for Kyle's early birthday dinner, and one generic, hope to see you soon, card in Mom's handwriting. I threw them all away. Not with anger. Just precision. I wasn't making a scene. I was setting a boundary. And boundaries don't need to be explained to people who've spent years ignoring the soft ones. Then I called my lawyer. His name's Dale. Old Army buddy. Trustworthy. Direct. We hadn't spoken in months, but he picked up right away. Marcus. Long time. What's going on? I told him I needed to update my will, clarify some things, remove a few names, add Eliza as sole beneficiary on all accounts, including the house. There was a pause. Not judgment, just understanding. He asked if I wanted to send over a note for the file. You know, for clarity if anyone contested anything later. I said yes. Wrote it that night. All decisions reflect the reality of care received, not blood shared. My son has earned everything with patience, silence, and grace. This is not revenge. It's realignment. That line. This is not revenge. It's realignment. It stayed with me. Because that's what this was. Not punishment. Not a grudge. Just a long overdue correction. A way to make sure that if I was ever gone, Eliza would never again need to wonder where he stood. No more guessing. No more waiting for invitations that arrived too late or not at all. Everything I had, everything I built, after crawling out of combat, after burying a marriage, after learning to raise a son on faith and instinct, would go to him. Because he was the only person who'd shown up for me without a scorecard or a spotlight. I mailed the updated forms the next morning. Registered mail. Signature required. When Cheryl called again that night, I let it go to voicemail. She said, "You're overreacting. They're hurt, Marcus." Mom cried all afternoon, and I sat in silence thinking, where was this concern when Eliza walked out that door on Christmas and no one followed? Where was the emotion when his name was left? Off the place cards, when his gifts were lighter, when his voice was drowned out by their comfort. They didn't cry then. So I didn't answer now, because from this moment forward, my son would never again wonder if he had a place at my table. That Saturday, we set our own table. No centerpiece, no matching silverware, no fine china passed down 3 generations, just 4 plates, warm food, and the kind of quiet that didn't demand explanation. Eliza, me, Dale, and Sarah. Dale brought ribs slow-cooked falling off the bone. Sarah, his wife, made cornbread and sweet potato mash. I handled the salad and overcooked the rice. No one cared. We sat around the small kitchen table, elbows, close knees, brushing plates too full, and glasses mismatched. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza didn't shrink. He wasn't performing. He wasn't being tolerated. He was just there, present, comfortable. I watched him laugh at one of Dale's terrible puns, a real laugh, the kind that lifts your shoulders and loosens your jaw. He told Sarah about a photo series he'd been working on. She leaned in, asked questions, and didn't once compare him to anyone else's kid. Dale offered to look at his college essays. Said, "You write the way you think?" That's rare. Eliza smiled at that. A small one. But it stayed. He didn't glance toward the door, didn't keep his hands under the table, didn't wait for someone to interrupt him. And I realized this was the first dinner where he didn't have to translate himself into something more palatable. We played cards after, a stupid game with made-up rules and too much laughing. When he won, he didn't say sorry. He didn't look down or say, just lucky. He owned it, like he'd finally understood this table didn't come with conditions. At one point, Sarah got up to get dessert. She asked Eliza to help carry plates. He did. Not out of obligation, but instinct. Because when you're included without having to earn it, you give back freely. I caught him watching the three of us at one point, just watching. Not with longing, not with envy. With peace. Like something inside him had finally unclenched. And I thought, this is what he's always deserved. Not the noise, not the spectacle, not a room full of people trying to outshine each other with cheer. Just this, a table, a seat, a space where he could unfold. After everyone left, we cleaned the dishes side by side. No rush, no words, just the sound of running water and plates stacking. When we were done, he said, "Dad." Tonight felt like something real. I didn't say much, didn't need to. I just squeezed his shoulder and said, "That's because it was." The next night I came downstairs a little late. Dinner was simple leftovers from Dale, and Sarah's visit warmed up in the oven. But Eliza had already set the table again. Neatly, quietly. 3 plates. Forks on the left. Napkins folded into imperfect triangles. And then a 4th chair. Pulled out. Placed not at the end, but directly in the center of the table facing no one. No plate. No silverware. Just empty. I stopped in the doorway. Expecting someone else, I joked, half smiling. Eliza didn't laugh. He looked at the chair, then back at me. "It's for me," he said softly. I raised an eyebrow. He clarified. "It's to remind myself who not to make room for anymore." The words hit hard not because they were cruel, but because they were clean. He didn't say it with bitterness. He didn't spit it like venom. He said it like someone who'd finally made peace with being cut out and had decided calmly not to invite that pain back in. He sat down, then added, "For a long time, I thought something was wrong with me. That if I were more talkative, or funnier, or easier to understand, they'd save me a seat." He tapped the edge of the empty chair. But now, I know. They never forgot to make space. They just didn't want to. I didn't interrupt him, didn't rush to soothe. I let him speak. Because this wasn't a moment that needed comforting. It needed witnessing. And I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to protect him, trying to absorb the slights before they reached his heart. But he'd felt every one. And now, instead of hiding from them, he'd done something braver than I ever had. He named it. Then he made space for its absence. After dinner, I helped him clear the table. He left the empty chair where it was, didn't push it in, didn't fold it away. Just walked past it like it wasn't a threat anymore. Like it was his, not theirs. That night, after the dishes were clean and the house had gone still, I found myself standing in the hallway, just outside Eliza's room. His door was slightly ajar, enough for me to see him asleep, arms tucked under his cheek, his breathing slow and even. The boy who once used to sleep, curled up like he was trying to take up less space, now lay stretched out soft, unguarded, at peace. And in that quiet, something clicked. A truth I should have known earlier, but only fully understood now. Family isn't about matching blood. It's about showing up. It's not the names in a will or the photos on a mantle. Not who shares your nose or who remembers your childhood allergies. It's who sits beside you when the room is cold. Who looks at you, really looks and says, "I see you. I hear you. You matter." And for Eliza, those people weren't the ones who shared his DNA. They were the ones who shared his silence, his awkward pauses, his love for stillness and depth. People like Dale, people like Sarah, people who didn't ask him to change the way he fit in, but changed the shape of the room to fit him better. I used to believe it was my job to keep Eliza connected to family, to keep the peace, to soften the edges, to explain away the coldness as misunderstanding. But now I saw it clearly. I wasn't breaking us away from family. I was guiding us toward the one we were meant to build. It wouldn't have generations of tradition, wouldn't come with matching pajamas or heirloom recipes, but it would be real, quiet, honest, enough. I took one last look at my son, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of safety one, and I thought, we're not waiting to be invited in anymore. We're already home. A week later it came. Thick envelope, ivory paper with embossed gold lettering, the kind of stationery Mom only used for weddings or retirement parties. It even smelled like her rosewater and control. I knew what it was before I opened it. An invitation. The handwriting was hers, meticulous cursive, slanted slightly right. Like everything about her, it asked for approval while asserting dominance. I opened it slowly, not out of hesitation, just curiosity. Inside was a folded card that read, New Year's dinner, January 1st, 6:30 p.m. And beneath that, a handwritten note in blue ink. Marcus, will make sure there's a seat for Eliza this time. Promise. That word, promise. It sat there like a Band-Aid slapped over a scar they'd ignored for years. Like the issue had always been about chairs, not the decades of quiet dismissal that built up around them. I held the card for a long time, read it twice. Once with anger. Once with a strange, reluctant kind of grief, because I knew they meant it. In their way, this was an olive branch, a symbol, a late attempt at inclusion. But symbols don't heal what they didn't bother to see when it was still bleeding. I thought about what it would be like, walking through that door again, the overly decorated dining room, the strained small talk, Eliza pretending to be fine, while Cheryl's kids dominated the conversation, and Mom beamed like everything had gone back to normal. But normal was what broke us, and normal was not what we needed. That night I left the invitation on the counter, didn't mention it to Eliza. He came into the kitchen humming to himself, carried 2 bowls of popcorn, one with extra salt, one plain. He knew which one was mine. He looked at the envelope, glanced at me. They invited us, he asked. I nodded. Said they'll make sure there's a seat this time. Eliza smiled, not out of excitement, but out of something wiser. They're a little late, huh? I looked at him, this boy who'd grown up too quickly in rooms where he was always too quiet, too careful, too much in the way. And I said what I needed to hear myself say. We already have a table, and your seat's been there the whole time. He clinked his bowl gently against mine. Cheers. To salt and silence, and finally being seen. We never RSVP'd. We didn't need to. Because this time, we weren't asking for space. We were choosing not to return to where we were only ever tolerated. 2 days before New Year's, Eliza finally brought it up again. We were in the garage changing the oil on his beat-up Camry, hands covered in grease. Music low on the radio, some old blues track Dale had recommended. Eliza wiped his fingers on a rag and said, "Do you want to go?" He didn't look at me when he asked, just kept working. Focused. Like the answer didn't really matter, but the question still needed asking. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to give him the chance to finish the thought. He glanced at me, then added, "If you want to go, I'll go. For you." There it was, the reflex again. That selfless, silent part of him that still wanted to belong somewhere, even if it cost him comfort. And that's when I did something I hadn't done enough of as his father. I asked him back, "Do you want to go?" He stopped wiping, leaned against the workbench, and for once he really considered it. No performance, no trying to guess what I wanted to hear. Just his own answer. After a moment, he said, "I don't think I do." Not bitter, not defensive, just clear. "I don't think it'll feel different even if they say it will." I nodded. Let the silence sit between us. Comfortable? Honest. "Then we won't go," I said. No guilt, no conditions. That was the end of it. He smiled barely, but it was the kind of smile that says, "Thank you for letting me choose." And in that moment, I realized he wasn't testing my loyalty. He was checking if I'd grown with him, if I understood that choosing peace over tradition wasn't rejection, it was protection. That night, we watched old sci-fi movies on the couch, microwaved leftovers, popcorn again. And not once did either of us look at the clock to wonder what we were missing. Because we weren't. We were right where we needed to be. Together. Without apology. The next morning, I sat down at the kitchen table. Same spot as before. Same old legal pad. Different reason. Eliza was still upstairs, probably sleeping in after our movie marathon. The house was quiet, but not heavy. It had the kind of silence that felt earned. Restful. I reached for a pen and pulled the pad closer. Tore off the last page, still stained faintly with a corner of grease from the garage. Fresh sheet, clean start. And then I wrote. But this time, it wasn't from me. This one was from Eliza. I didn't forge his handwriting, didn't pretend to be his voice. But I knew him well enough to write the kind of letter he might have one day written himself, if he thought it would be heard. It wasn't angry. It didn't accuse. It simply said, "Dear Grandma, Grandpa, Cheryl. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for thinking of me finally. But I need you to know I won't be coming back. Not because I hate you. Not because I want to hurt you. But because I've spent too many years hoping someone would notice I was always standing at the edge of the room. I don't need a chair anymore. I have one where I'm wanted, not accommodated. I hope you all have a good dinner. I hope the food is warm and the laughter feels real. But I'll be spending mine at a table that never asked me to shrink to fit. Love, Eliza." I folded the letter carefully, just like he folds his laundry corners, aligned, no creases out of place. I placed it in an envelope. No return address. No drama. Just a truth sealed. When Eliza came downstairs, I handed it to him. He looked at it, then looked at me. "What's this?" I said. "Something I thought you might want to say. You don't have to read it. You don't even have to send it. But it's yours." He sat with it, held it in both hands. Didn't open it. Didn't need to. After a moment, he nodded once. "Yeah, that feels right." We didn't mail it. We burned it in the fireplace that night. No ceremony, no speeches. Just quiet flames, and a boy who had finally refused to beg for a seat at a table that never saw his worth. The email came on a Thursday. Subject line, "Congratulations, Eliza Delaney, award recipient." At first, I thought it was spam, one of those generic school notifications. But Eliza stood frozen in front of the computer eyes, scanning, not blinking. Then he turned to me and said, "I won, just like that." Flat voice, disbelief still settling in his chest. He won. The statewide student photography scholarship, $5,000 for tuition, national recognition, and a mentorship with a working photojournalist. He submitted a single photo, one entry, taken in our dining room. The image, a plain wooden chair, empty, centered at the table. One beam of sunlight across the seat. Every other chair pushed back, barely visible in the frame. He called it the inheritance. When I asked why, he said, "Because sometimes what we leave behind tells more truth than what we're given." And just like that, I knew exactly what he meant. That chair, the one he used to beg to fill, the one he was always denied, was now the symbol of everything he refused to carry forward. The photo had no people, no drama, no labels, but the silence in it. It roared. The judges described it as hauntingly honest and emotionally restrained. One said it looked like belonging withheld. They didn't know his story. They didn't need to, because that image carried something universal. The ache of being near love but not within it. The coldness of rituals that forget to make room. The courage it takes to say no more. We printed out the award email and taped it to the fridge, not out of pride, out of acknowledgement. This wasn't just a win, it was a declaration. That his voice, quiet as it may be, was powerful. That his absence in certain rooms wasn't a wound anymore, it was a choice. A week later, the school featured the image in the lobby gallery. Parents walked past it every day. Students paused. And Eliza. He didn't hover by it, didn't wait for compliments. He just passed by, once nodded to himself and kept walking. Because that chair no longer held him back. It had lifted him forward. That night, I found the original photo file on his computer. Black and white. Shot in natural light. No edits. I looked at it for a long time. Then I printed a copy and hung it on our kitchen wall, right above the place where he first left that chair empty on purpose. I hung the photo that night, right above the kitchen table. Centered. Framed. Matte black edges, simple glass. No spotlight. No engraved plaque. Just that image. A single empty chair bathed in light. Eliza didn't say anything when he saw it. He just walked in, looked at the wall, then down at the table where we were setting dinner. Set down the forks, took his seat. The real one, the one that had always been his. Later, as we washed dishes shoulder to shoulder, he glanced up at the photo and asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand it?" I knew who he meant. No names needed. I thought about it for a moment. Let the steam from the sink cloud my glasses a bit. Then I said, maybe. Maybe not. But understanding was never the point. Freedom was. He didn't ask anything else, and neither of us mentioned them again. Because the truth is that photo wasn't about them. It wasn't a weapon or a message. It was a marker, a quiet monument to everything we'd unlearned, everything we'd reclaimed. That chair, once a symbol of exclusion, was now a reminder. We don't have to beg for space at a table we built ourselves. It wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about making peace without asking for permission. Because real family, the kind that shows up, holds space, asks, listens, and stays, doesn't need your blood or your blessing to be real. They just need you. As you are. Unperformed. Unedited. Unapologetic. And that night, with leftovers on our plates, and the hum of the heater filling the room, I realized we'd done it. We had built a home from the pieces no one else wanted to keep. A family that didn't start with tradition, but with truth. And in that truth, there was warmth, a kind I hadn't known even existed. Not the kind that fills a room with noise, but the kind that lets silence be safe. That chair, that photo, that place on our wall. It's not a reminder of what we lost. It's proof of what we never needed to begin with. People still ask about the photo. Friends, new coworkers, neighbors who come by for dinner and glance at the wall just above the table where we eat, talk, and laugh without rehearsal. They see it, that single empty chair bathed in natural light, surrounded by shadows just faint enough to notice. And without fail, someone always asks, what's the story behind that Eliza never flinches? Doesn't dodge or dismiss. He just smiles calm, steady, and says, that was the moment everything changed. And I always finish it for him, because one chair, I say one refusal to be erased, can reset the whole table. It catches people off guard, not because it's poetic, but because it's true. It only takes one moment, one person brave enough to stand up to say, this isn't right, to walk away from where they're not valued and build something new. That's how you change everything, not by demanding a place at someone else's feast, but by setting your own table and saving a seat for those who show up in truth. Eliza never asked for perfection. He just wanted presence. And when presence wasn't given freely, he learned with grace, I'm still catching up to find value in the spaces he carved for himself. There's no anger in him anymore, just clarity, just boundaries that don't need defending. That photo on the wall. It's not about pain now, it's about power, the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, I remember I rebuilt, and I am no longer waiting. This was never a story about vengeance. It was a story about sight, about finally seeing who stands with you when the music stops and the chairs are few. And if I've learned anything, it's that you don't need a full room to feel full. You just need one chair, one truth, and the courage to stand when everyone else is still pretending to be fine. Because sometimes, just one person standing is all it takes to reset every table for the better.